Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, salatu wa salam wa rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm seeing some new faces. If you are interested in following along, we have prepared these booklets for the students. It is a summary and translation of the book that we are covering called Da'u wa Dawa, The Illness and the Cure by Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, who died 751 after the Hijrah. You can purchase the copy just at the back over there at the table if you are interested. We will be going through it, inshallah ta'ala, for some time. We left off on page 18, where the subheading is the minor can become major. And this section is about the idea, essentially, that minor and major sins, as we defined them last week, the minor can actually become a major sin if it's accompanied with one property, and that property is called Israr. Israr. Alif Sin Ra Alif Ra. Israr. And this principle of Israr comes from the Quran itself. وَلَمْ يُصِرُّوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلُوا وَهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ. That they, this is in Surah Al Imran, that they do not do Israr. What is Israr? Israr is to insist, I think is the right word. Insist. People say persist or continuously do the minor sin, and then it basically upgrades to a major sin. Basically, if you continuously do a minor sin, habitually, constantly, then it becomes upgraded into a major sin. So any minor sin can actually become a major sin. But the point of Israr is not just about repetitiveness, it's this sense of insistence upon it. That you don't care, you're not trying to repel it. It's not describing the person that's trying to avert themselves from a sin, but they keep messing up. That person will do a sin and then they'll ask Allah for forgiveness, and then the sin will happen again and ask Allah for forgiveness. This is not Israr. This is not Israr, even though they're continuing to do the sin, because after each sin there is istighfar. There's istighfar. So there's a beautiful statement attributed to Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, that there is no Zohair, there are no minor sins ma'al Israr, with Israr, meaning there's no such thing as a minor sin if a person has this attitude of they don't care to try and stop whatever sin that they're doing. وَلَا كَبَائِرَ وَلَا كَبِيرَ مَعَ التَّوْبَةِ. And there's no such thing as a major sin with tawbah, meaning with tawbah the sin goes away. So that was just that section there, just for completeness. So we finish up page 18. Page 19 and 20 is personal reading for you all. Page 19 and 20 is personal reading for you all. So we start this section, which is on the same section on sin. This is part 2. And we go to page 21. And we're going to cover, inshallah ta'ala, the 4 entryways of sin, as it's described, the madakhil. The ways in which a human being goes from being on the fitrah, the default setting, the factory setting, which is meant to be a setting where our hearts are yearning for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where does it go from this pure fitrah to sin, to disobeying Allah, to doing the wrong thing, to committing a crime, to doing something that is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially as believers, someone who believes in Allah, someone who believes in the akhirah. Can you imagine someone actually believes in the akhirah, believes in the punishment of the grave, believes in the reward of Jannah, believes in all the rewards and the magnitude of the reward and punishment of the akhirah, but yet they still sin? And that's a very interesting thing, isn't it? And so Ibn al-Qayyim describes 4 different ways in which one seemingly insignificant moment or action will actually lead a person down a path towards sin. So the 4 entryways are, number 1, the glance or the lahadat, the glances, a very momentary glance. Number 2 is the khawatir or the khatirat, the thoughts. The thoughts, passing thoughts, fleeting thoughts, that's number 2. Number 3 is utterances, lafadat, utterances, just a statement that a person might say, or something a person might be conversing with someone about. And then the last one is steps, khatirat, the steps that a person might take. So these are the four. We start with the first one. And now here Ibn al-Qayyim is really going in deep. In the book itself, it's actually towards the end that Ibn al-Qayyim actually goes through these particular madakhil. The first one that he mentions is the glance. It has to do with sight, with vision. And Ibn al-Qayyim is saying that the glance is the ra'id, is the reconnaissance, and the messenger, the Rasul of the desire. So a person's glance and where a person chooses to look, what is determining the eye motion and what's determining what they're focusing on, it is commands coming from the heart, coming from what the person truly desires in the heart. And he says that وَحِفْظُهَا أَصْلُ حِفْظُ الْفَرَجِ, that guarding the sight, the vision, the glances is the foundation, is the fundamental of guarding one's private parts, meaning the sins that have to do of a sexual nature. And he explains, of course, or rather in the Quran you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pairs these two things together. Lower your gaze, وَاحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ. Lower your gaze, يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ. Let them obscure their vision and lower their gaze. Then the next statement Allah mentions is, and guard their privates. So these two things are linked together, the gaze and those desires. Now, Ibn al-Qayyim didn't include hearing, by the way, in any of these madakhil. Hearing, you could say, perhaps comes under this chapter heading, you can say, or this particular madkhal. You could say hearing comes with this as well, the glance and hearing. But one interesting thing about vision, about the actual kind of neurophysiology of vision, is that you can't actually look at more than one thing at the same time and actually focus on it. There's a part at the back of your eye, which is called the retina. That's where all the photoreceptors are. Okay, apologize, I'm about to geek out and go a bit science, but just stay with me. So there's the retina that has these photoreceptors. What do those photoreceptors do? They take the light that goes through your pupil, goes through, and it hits this photoreceptor. It converts that photo energy into basically a conductive pathway, and it basically induces an electrical signal that passes through into your visual cortex. So the back of your eye is filled with all these photoreceptors, waiting to capture all this light that's coming in. And then your brain, basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created it in such a beautiful way, takes all that data, and in your consciousness comes this incredible image with depth and understanding of, the separation of objects and motion and so many different things that your brain is able to perceive, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has built in this hardware and software into. Now, there's one element, or there's one part of the retina, it's called the fovea. Does anyone know what the fovea is? No one knows what the fovea is? Yes?
It helps with concentration. So I feel like that's the thing that the image connects.
Excellent, very good. The fovea is where you have the most dense photoreceptors. That's actually the one area of your eye that then focuses on an image. And it's just this one area. Outside of the fovea, it's all just peripheral and it's all just blurry. So the fovea is this one spot. Now, why did Allah create the eye like this? Because as you go through the complexities of the world that you have to navigate, there's so much data. I mean, if you just look at it right now, there are so many different things that are happening at this moment, right? There's different colors, there's various different objects, there's movement of different kinds. This is a bit more of a simple setting, obviously, if you're sitting on that side. But if you go outside, if you're walking into the city or whatever it may be, I mean, there's cars, there's honking, there's so much. But your brain basically, and your mind, is trying to weed out the noise, what's irrelevant, and focus on the signal. And that's the point. You're trying to weed out all the noise. In fact, that's one of the things that is actually really interesting. Okay, everyone close their eyes right now. Everyone close their eyes right now. Nobody look. Brother, I see you there with your eyes open. I see you there. Okay, Bismillah. Sisters, I trust your eyes are closed, inshallah. So, I have a question. Put your hand up if there's a tree behind me. Not right behind me, but if there's a tree basically at the front of the room. Put your hand up if you think there's a tree. Way up, way up, way up. Okay, if you don't think there's a tree, put your hand up. Open your eyes and look to your right. The back. So the whole time you were here, sitting here, and your vision was capturing that actually. But your mind completely blocked it out. Why? Because that's just noise. It's completely irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything. It's not something that's important to you right now. So you didn't even process it. Although you're actually seeing it. It's in your visual periphery. But your mind didn't process it. Why? Your mind chose to focus your fovea on, hopefully the teacher, but it could be anything else. And you can try and do this. You'll be sitting in a room and and tell everyone to close their eyes. A place like this where people come all the time, they'll know the color of the carpets. But you'll be surprised if they go to a new room and they're there for 3 hours and you tell them close their eyes, they won't remember what the color of the carpet was because it's just noise. Now, there's a really deep message behind this, the way that Allah created the eye like this, of the idea of removing the noise and only able to focus on one thing in the environment. Is this not a beautiful symbolic representation of La ilaha illallah? That just as Allah has created in your eye, weed out all of the noise, all the distraction, all the things that don't matter, and only focus on the one thing that matters at every moment. At every moment, you have a choice in your brain and with your eyes. Every moment you are choosing where you want to put your attention, and you only have one choice. And so this is La ilaha illallah. There is nothing worthy of worship. Everything else in this world is noise. Illallah, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is in the fitrah, this is in our physiology, this is the way that we even see. You can only see one thing, that's it. And you have to choose what is the one thing you're going to see. Similarly, when it comes to what you want to worship, where you want to head towards in life, there's only one way. And you're going to have to choose. And that's La ilaha illallah. Are you able to remove all the noise and recognize what truly matters in life? Just like are you able in any room, in any scenario, to weed out the noise and recognize what's important in the room? So, in order to do this, in order to understand where our gaze should be, because that's the point of glance. If your glance is to the wrong thing, it will lead to the wrong action. If your glance is towards the right thing, it will lead towards the right action. So the question is, what is the signal? Whenever you move into a room, what's the signal that you want to focus your fovea on? What is the signal? And the signal is something that should be what's valuable in that room. Perhaps it's something that's going to be a reward, something meaningful. That's the signal in any situation that you're in, and that's what you should be focused on. So, in order to focus on what's truly meaningful in this world, a person actually has to have a sense of sabr and a sense of yaqeen. What do I mean by that? Because the fovea can focus on what's actually meaningful and important and valuable for that person's life in the akhirah, or they can focus on what the nafs desires. And that's what Ibn al-Qayyim is saying here, that the desires can send and choose to move the eye wherever it wishes and attend to whatever it wishes. So you have a choice in any moment, in any situation, any circumstance that you find yourself in. You actually have a choice of where you choose to put your attention, the attention of your eyes. Will it be towards the object of your desires, or will it be towards the object of your worship. When it comes to the object of desires, those are the things that a person will look at and crave at. And it will be something that the nafs wants. In order to divert it away from those things, in any room, in any situation, on the street, wherever it may be, it requires two things: sabr and yaqeen. A person that focuses on the right thing, which is, what are the signals? The signals are, quite literally, ayat. That's even the translation of ayah, is a sign or a signal, sign, signal. The ayat are all around you. The signals are all around you. Those are the ayat of Allah. Everything other than the ayat is just noise. So, in order to focus on these things, you need two things: sabr and yaqeen. You need sabr to restrain your desire from looking at what you're not supposed to be looking at. And you need yaqeen. Why do you need yaqeen? You need to be convinced. You need to have knowledge and be convinced of that knowledge of where the signal is. And you need to be having that yaqeen that what you're looking at is the sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an indication of His names and attributes. So, with that brief introduction to the glance, just to go through some of the text here, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he brings forth many ahadith. One of them here in the Sunan of Abi Dawood, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Do not follow one glance with another glance. The first one, which was accidental, is for you," meaning that was something that's unaccounted for, it's for you, that's something that you didn't have control over, whereas the second is not. And so this is the idea that you might look at something that you shouldn't have looked at, that's an object of desire, and so that first time you look at it, it's there, it's forgiven. But now is the choice. Do I continue to focus on that? And if you choose to do that, then a person becomes sinful. The Prophet ﷺ said, this hadith is in At-Tabarani, and it's also in the Mustadrak of Al-Hakim as well. And this one, many of the muhaddithun, they judged it as da'if jiddan, which is very weak. Other people have given other gradings, such as Al-Hakim himself in his Mustadrak. But the meaning is something that is correct, which is why Ibn al-Qayyim includes it here. And so that's why if you note there in the translation, the first one I said the Prophet ﷺ said, but this one we wrote, the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said. And that's a subtle difference, but it's important for the preciseness that we like to have and care when it comes to the words of the Prophet ﷺ, because if we're not sure, and if there's doubt in its transmission, then we don't attribute it with certainty to the Prophet ﷺ. So that's why it's reported. This is something that people have said and attributed it to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, إِنَّ النَّظْرَةَ سَهْمٌ مِّن سِهَامِ إِبْلِيسِ مَسْمُومٌ. That the unlawful glance is a poisoned arrow from the arrows of Shaytan. مَنْ تَرَكَهَا, whoever diverts their gaze from the appearances of women for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will cast sweetness in their heart until the day He meets him. أَبْدَلْتُهُ إِيمَانًا يَجِدُ حَلَاوَتَهُ فِي قَلْبِهِ. He will find a sweetness in their heart. And so we learn here two principles. Number one is that the glance is not only the messenger of desire, but the glance itself is an arrow that the shaitan uses to fire at his target. And it's a poisoned arrow. And what's the thing about something that's poisoned? See, an arrow is something that will hit you, and you know it's hit you. Obviously, there's a wound there, and you know it's there. The poison is something that seeps in, and it will get you a few hours later. So the glance is something, as we're going to come to, that can lead to thoughts and then can lead to fantasies. The second thing that we learn from this is that a person who has the sabr to control themselves and control their vision from what is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah will replace it with something even sweeter. Because the point is, and this is something that is a principle in the akhirah, it's a theological principle. Al-jaza'u jinsul amal. Al-jaza'u jinsul amal, which means the category of reward is connected to the category of action. Al-jaza'u jinsul amal. That the reward is based upon the category of action. So what does that mean? If a person, for example, this is actually a good example. A person has diverted his gaze away, even though if he continued to look, it would bring about some pleasure inside of themselves from their nafs, right? That they're looking at this. Now they've decided to give that up for the sake of Allah. So you have given up a pleasure inside of your nafs for the sake of Allah. So now what is Allah's reward for you? He replaces it with a pleasure inside of the heart. So you see, al-jaza'u jinsul amal. And it works both ways with punishment as well. Someone who is bad to their parents, then when they have children, those children will be bad to them. That's al-jaza'u jinsul amal. That what they get was based upon what they acted with. So it works with both reward and it also works with punishment as well. And this is part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qadr. We move on to page 22. There's a very important passage here. Glances are the basis of every sin humanity suffers from. The glance sparks a thought. So from vision to thinking, the glance sparks a thought. فإن النظرة تولد خطرة ثم تولد الخطرة فكرة. So the glance leads to a passing thought, a khatra. Khatra is like a passing thought, a fleeting thought, an idea that comes into the head. ثم تولد الخطرة فكرة. Then that passing thought turns into a bit of a deeper contemplation, like fantasization, like really indulging in that thought. ثم تولد الفكرة شهوة. Then all that thinking and that pattern of thought and that indulgence and that fantasy then leads to a desire, shahwa. ثم تولد الشهوة إرادة. Then the shahwa, that desire, you feel this desire, it then turns into a specific intention. It's specific intention. So it goes from a general desire to a specific intention, to a specific action that your mind has transferred. That desire, that passion, that general desire towards whatever it may be, to a specific action that's within your means. Then it gets stronger and intensifies. That intention, that irada, intensifies until it becomes azima, a determination. From irada to a determination, azima, a firm determination. Then the action takes place without fail. فَيَقَعَ الْفِعْلِ وَلَا بُدْ. As long as no obstacle prevents it, meaning there's not someone physically there to restrain you. This is the process from the glance to the action. So it goes from a glance to a fleeting thought, to a fantasy, to a desire, to an intention, to a determination, then to an action. But it all started with the glance. It all started with the glance. Now, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he then quotes some beautiful poetry, and then he actually he quotes his own poetry. He says, وَلِيَ بَيْتٌ أَيْضًا, I also have some verses to add to this. And so we'll go through it inshallah ta'ala, the poetry here. Now the translation is there on your notes. And so I'll just read through inshallah ta'ala the Arabic, and then we'll just go through a bit of commentary as well. I don't really have a very good poetry singing voice at all, so Bismillah. كل الحوادث مبداها من النظر ومعظم النار من مستصغر الشرر كم نظرة بلغت من قلب صاحبها كمبلغ السهم بين القوس والوتر. So actually that's a bit of a misprint. That first statement there is not a الصبر على غض البصر, that's not a poem, that's just a statement that Ibn al-Qayyim made, which is the patience required to avert the gaze is far easier than the patience required for the pain that comes after it. And then he starts to quote this poetry here. Every problematic event in the world starts with a simple gaze. Just like a seemingly insignificant spark can turn into a giant blaze. والعبد ما دام ذا طرف يقلبه في أعين الغيد موقوف على الخطر يسر مقلته ما ضر مهجته لا مرحبا بسرور عاد بالضرر. How many a glance are from what the heart will bring, just like the arrow is launched between the bow and its string. So long as the servant's eye inspects every fair lady who arrives, then the cliff's edge beneath him will rarely survive. He pleases his eye with what violates his soul. Unwelcome is a thrill that leaves a devastating toll. And when you deploy your sights to scout for your heart, then each image will only exhaust you more than the start. Now, Ibn al-Qayyim brings that principle out and then he quotes the poetry. Now what was that principle? The principle was the patience required to avert the gaze is easier than the patience required for the pain that comes after the gaze. Meaning, when it starts with just the gaze, that's the easiest to divert. When that gaze turns into the thought, and then the thought leads to this rumination on it, that's when it becomes more difficult. And then when it leads to a desire even more, then it needs to, I just need to take this. Bismillah. Okay, sorry guys. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, as-salatu wa-salam wa ba'd. We were talking about, yes, so Ibn al-Qayyim brings this about the sabr, right? The two sabrs. By the way, I got feedback that we need a break in between because an hour and 10 is a bit too much. Is that true? Khalas. That was the break. Okay, very good. Alhamdulillah. Alrighty. I won't reveal the age of the brother who told me that it was going a bit too much. But anyways. Bismillah. So, yes. الصبر على غض البصر أيسر من الصبر على ألم ما بعده. So, the sabr and the control that's required for the gaze is a lot easier than when the thought turns into fantasy and when the fantasy turns into desire and it turns into intention. It becomes far harder at that point. Also, Ibn al-Qayyim is referring to an alam or a pain that's here. There's a pain that comes when you gaze at something that is haram or just gaze at something in general that can lead to something haram. So what does he mean by this? What is the pain that he's talking about? You see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the world a very triggering place. A very triggering place. That a person will look at something and it will trigger them, and it can trigger many different things within them. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Kahf, إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا مَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ زِينَةً لَهَا لِنَبْلُوَهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. That we have made on this earth what is beautiful to test them. Who is going to be the best in action? Who is going to choose the best out of it all? And so the world is a world of distraction, and it is designed to trigger different things in you when you look at it. So, the first thing, what kind of things does it trigger? The first thing we'll go through four things inshallah. The first thing is greed. That when you look at things, it can trigger a sense of greed or hirs within us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تمدن عينيك إلى ما متعنا به أزواجا منهم زهرة الحياة الدنيا لنفتنهم فيه ورزق ربك خير. Do not extend your eyes toward what we have temporarily blessed them with of spouses and children, or of spouses, of families basically, in order that we test them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, زهرة الحياة الدنيا, the beautification, the adornment of this world. So Allah is saying that a person will look at the adornment of this world and it can trigger a sense of hirs. Like you're looking at what everybody else has and you're saying, I want that too. You're looking at the beauty of this world and you're looking and you're wanting to chase after it. This is hirs, this is greed. And from that seed of greed that comes, that's triggered within the heart when you look at the worldly possessions. You know, you look at, the pictures and the billboards of the fancy cars or that nice house or the dream home. You go on the freeway and it says retiring early in your 50s or living well in your 40s or something, and you've got this dream home out in the ocean at the Gold Coast. Like, we got some of the brothers of the Gold Coast here, mashallah. Jazakumullah khairan, welcome, ahlan wa sahlan. We don't always talk bad about the Gold Coast. So that's not a thing that we always do. This triggers this sense of greed inside of us. And what does that greed lead to? It leads to things like riba. Because when you want something and you can't afford it, what do? You run to the bank. You want to get a loan, you want to deal in the riba system to get what you cannot afford. It can lead to crime, obviously, where you decide to steal or to take things from other people. It can lead you to neglect relationships because you're so greedy over the worldly things that your mind and your attention isn't towards your actual responsibilities and your actual relationships, whether they be family or friends. It can corrupt your intentions as well, even in a religious sense. If you're involved in religious activities, this can corrupt your intention when you see things. I can speak very personally here. I just got onto now social media. It's something I've avoided for literally 6, 7, 8 years. People have been saying, oh, start something. I've always been avoiding it because of one of these things. Because of the fact that this sense of greed, you look at the followers, you look at the likes, you look at the reach, you look at all these different things, and you want more and more and more. And it can corrupt your intentions. That you're no longer doing it for the sake of Allah, but you're doing it for what you're actually chasing after. So these things in the world that you're seeing, and it's with that vision, it can trigger greed inside the heart. That's number one. Number two, it can trigger lust and desires. It can trigger shahwa, lust and desires. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically says in the Quran, يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ. When it comes to the males, وَيَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ, for the females. قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ. Tell the believing men to lower their gaze. And وَلِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ. And to the believing women to lower their gaze. To not stare or to look at something with desire. And to continuously look at it with desire. There's an interesting statement. We eat first with our eyes. And so the eyes and the gaze, Ibn al-Qayyim actually, he speaks about this. That'll be for a different section, inshallah. But the path to, so this particular thing that's triggered, lust or desire, what does it lead to? We said how greed can lead to riba, can lead to corrupt intentions, can lead to neglect relationships. What does lust and desires lead to? It leads to zina. It can lead to murder as well. A lot of what is the underlying motivation behind murder, a lot of it is actually stemming from lust and desire. In the Quran, actually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings these two together. وَلَا يَقْتُلُونَ النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ وَلَا يَزْنُونَ. Do not kill any innocent person and do not commit zina. These two things are brought together here. And you can see how they often co-occur. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا إِنَّهُ فَاحِشَةٌ إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. Don't go close to zina. It is a fahisha and it is a sa'a sabila. It is an evil path. Allah describes zina actually as a path. It's not just a singular action. It's actually a path. And the beginning of the path, or you can say the gateway or the door to enter into the path, is the glance. And so a person should recognize that every time they're looking at an object of desire, they're actually opening the door that is a road of zina. That's the pathway of zina. It's literally a highway to hell. It's a destructive path, sa'a sabil. And the first door to open is the glance. The third thing that it can trigger is hasad or jealousy. Hasad or jealousy. And Allah references the evil that can come from hasad. In fact, we are asked to, multiple times in the day and in the evening and the night before going to sleep, take protection in Allah from the evil of hasad. What does it mean, the evil of hasidin idha hasad? The evil of the hasid, the one who is jealous, when he does his jealousy, This is not just sihr. This is any action of evil that can be done towards their object of hatred. And so the evil that comes from hasad is something that is very, very grand. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ said, it is like a fire that burns through all the good deeds. When you have hasad in the heart. You can be doing all this good, but the moment that you're tested with this comparison with another person, and you feel jealous of that person, and what is jealousy? When you feel that person doesn't deserve what they have, and that you deserve it. That you want that thing to be removed from them and given to you. That is the definition of hasad. That is the major sin of hasad, of jealousy. And one of the reasons why it's so problematic, and the reason also gives us the cure in and of itself as well, is that when you are jealous of someone, when you have hasad, you're actually challenging the decision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because you are saying, that person doesn't deserve that, I do. Who is the one who gave it to him and not to you? Who gave it to that person and not to you? It's not exactly rocket science, guys. Allah, you thought it was a rhetorical question. Fair enough, it doesn't sound like a rhetorical question. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, who are you unhappy with? And that in and of itself is the cure as well. When you realize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has destined this, and Allah has decreed this to be it this way. And also the other thing is that sometimes we look at people, this was discussed in the After Hours podcast last week. Sometimes you see someone that's truly like an evil person, and subhanAllah, they have so much. And you wonder why. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أَيَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّمَا نُمِدُّهُمْ بِهِ مِن مَالٍ وَبَنِينَ نُسَارِعُ لَهُمْ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ بَلْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. Do they think that we extend to them these children and wealth because we want good for them? No, not at all. They don't understand, they don't realize, they don't perceive what's happening. لِنَفْتِنَهُمْ فِي, in the ayah in the other surah. These are tests that Allah gives to people to increase their punishment. It's something that will increase their liability. And so don't question the decision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Excuse me. That's the third thing, hasad. What's another thing that can be triggered by a simple gaze? Animosity, bughd and adawa. Especially if you have animosity with someone else and you see something that reminds you of them, or you see them, then what happens? It triggers that anger inside of the heart. That bughd and that adawa. And this is something that's important for us to keep in check. Now, all these things that we mentioned, subhanAllah, what an incredible place social media is. Because you'll get all of this as you just scroll through, triggering constantly all these different emotions. I mean, subhanAllah, when it comes to lust and desires, no matter where you look, you're going to be confronted with these images, but particularly within social media. And subhanAllah, there are some Muslims, they even willfully will follow these pages knowing what it is. Brothers and sisters, this is really not appropriate at all. And saying, oh, look at how beautiful this person is, or look at how handsome this person is, etc. This is completely, completely unacceptable. And it is something that is bringing in the desire into the heart and the fantasization and everything like this. And it's destroying the soul. Greed and jealousy as well, constant comparison. That's the social media feed, subhanAllah. It's a very, it's something that doesn't bring the best out of someone. That's why they call it doom scrolling, right? They call it doom scrolling. You doom scroll all the way to doomsday. Because it's just something that you go from one thing to another. Now obviously, there's beneficial ways to use it, but it's something to really recognize that what's happening inside the heart as you're going through all these things. Bismillah. We move on to 24. Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, he keeps quoting the poems here. I'll leave you to read that on your own time. We'll go through Ibn al-Qayyim's poems. ولي من أبيات, he says, مل السلامة فاغتدت لحظاته وقفا على طلل يظن جميلا ما زال يتبع إثره لحظاته حتى تشحط بينهن قتيلا. It's actually in page 24. He grew bored of safety. That's actually Ibn al-Qayyim's own poem. So Ibn al-Qayyim's own poem should actually have started with he grew bored of safety. That's in 24. That's his own. He grew bored of safety, so he unleashed his glances, chasing after dumps, presuming they were beautiful romances. One step after another, he followed his glance until he fell prey to that fatal dance. And so Ibn al-Qayyim is literally describing them as qatila, like this person's soul has been destroyed by it. يا راميا بسهام اللحظ مجتهدا أنت القتيل بما ترمي فلا تصبي وباعث الطرف يرتاد الشفاء له احبس رسولك لا يأتيك بالعطب. O you who toils to let the glance arrows fly, you are the victim of your shot, so avoid the bull's eye. Now, what's really interesting there of that ayah verse there is that Ibn al-Qayyim is referencing obviously the poisoned arrow of Shaytan, and he's now referring to the person who is basically shooting the arrows at themselves. That when you look at something that is going to just ignite passions and desires within you, you are literally throwing your own arrow, but it's going towards the target of yourself. Yet still its glance. So, O you who, for some healing on his sights he relies, restrain your messenger before he brings back your demise. What's the messenger? That's the glance. Yet still it's glance after glance, wherever you can, in pursuit of every attractive woman and man. You think that this will heal the hole in your heart, but truly it was wound upon wound right from the start. You ruined your eyes, gaze with stares and tears, leaving your heart as if shredded with shears. So all those different poems really focus on this idea of how important the battleground of the vision and the eyes are. So that is the glance. Now we move on to the passing thought, the khatarat, the passing thoughts. So the first one was eyes, vision. Now we move on to the passing thoughts. Ibn al-Qayyim starts the section by saying, whoever can guide or lead or control, the term he uses is ra'a, which is basically like ri'aya, which is how a shepherd leads his flock. So whoever can guide or control or lead his thoughts, these khatras, these thoughts, will have control of his nafs and can conquer their desires, their shahwa. But whoever is overcome and is controlled by his thoughts, so their thoughts are now controlling them and they have no control of it, the thoughts are leading him, then his nafs and desires have actually conquered him, and they will eventually lead him to his destruction. They'll eventually lead him to his destruction. Ibn al-Qayyim says that this is actually a harder battleground than the first one. The eyes are a lot easier to control. When it turns into the thought, as we spoke about, this is actually much harder. And then he explains from the seed of the khatra, from this thought, you get three different things: irada, the iradat, the himam, and the azaim. Iradat are intentions. So as we described how it goes from a simple fleeting thought to intention. But it also leads to the himam, what a person aspires towards, their motivational state, what they're motivated by, what is moving them. That's their himma, you can say. And then the azaim, what they're determined to do. So all of this is taken out and started from the thought, from the khatra, from the passing thought. Now, Ibn al-Qayyim, he actually brings forth this ayah, but he describes that a person who is controlled by their thoughts, they cannot stop these thoughts from coming back, circling back into their head. Like the thought, and it becomes a pattern of thought. It becomes a thought pattern, quite literally. Like a pattern of thought where one thing is then thought to the other. And this doesn't have to just do with desire, it can do with anything. In psychology, they talk about cognitive construals, or having a schemata, or a cognitive schemata, meaning a pattern of thinking. For example, a person can have a depressogenic schemata. They can have a very depressing way of interpreting and thinking about everything. So they talk about personalization. Whenever anything happens, it all becomes them. All this, it's all my fault. I messed up completely on me. This personalization, that's the way they're thinking and processing something. And then there's the idea as well, there's other things as well. These are heuristics and ways in which people, their reflex thought pattern about something, and the reflex judgment about something. And these are the khatirat that will just come and they just will ruminate on it. Maybe it's a failure that they just keep thinking about, a regret that they keep having that they can't stop thinking about. Why did I do that? If only I had, and we know that law is from Shaytan. The statement, if only, is from the Shaytan. Because the Shaytan just wants you to be consumed with regret and sadness and desires. And so the mind just constantly cycles and ruminates. And you might be thinking about something that happened to you. How could that person say that to me? Makes you angry. Then you think about it even more, makes you more angry. Then you think about the fact that you didn't do anything in that scenario, it makes you even more angry. And it keeps going on and on and on, and you can't sleep. These khatirat, these fleeting thoughts that then become taraddud. They just keep coming back and back and back. You ruminate on them, you can't shake them. They could be negative thoughts about yourself, about your esteem, about your worth. Body image issues, whatever it may be. You're just constantly consumed by this. So Ibn al-Qayyim explains, you either control these thoughts or it will control you. Either you can control and direct the thoughts where you want them to direct to, towards greener pastures, or the sheep will take you wherever the sheep take you. And the shepherd that's guided by the sheep is not like the sheep that is guided by the shepherd. And then he explains that these thoughts and all these things that come to the mind, حَتَّى تُصِيرَ مُنَى بَاطِلًا, until it becomes basically a useless fantasy. Like it just becomes a fantasy that's completely unrealistic, and you're just fantasizing about things, and you're just daydreaming about nothing basically. Well, not nothing, just something that you're desiring perhaps. And then he brings this ayah to describe this person that's just constantly having these thoughts in their head. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. والذين كفروا أعمالهم كسراب بقيعة يحسبه الظمآن ماء حتى إذا جاءه لم يجده شيئا ووجد الله عنده فوفاه حسابه والله سريع الحساب. As for the disbelievers, their deeds are like a mirage in a desert, which the thirsty perceive as water. But when they approach it, they find it to be nothing. Instead, they find Allah there in the hereafter, ready to settle their account. And Allah is swift in reckoning. So this ayah here, he's saying it's like a mirage. These people just have these thoughts and these fantasies, and it has no grounding in reality. And then Ibn al-Qayyim then goes on and he describes, and he really criticizes very strongly people who are just happy and content with just having these fantasies in their head. And he describes them as the most despicable of people, the most lowly nafs. That they see these thoughts and these fantasies as complete distractions. And they see it as something that will bring them absolutely no benefit whatsoever. And rather they only focus on 4 fundamental domains. And so Ibn al-Qayyim then describes these 4 fundamental thought domains that the noble, beautiful nufus, the souls that have nobility to them, integrity, that have worth and value and virtue to them, their thoughts, they don't allow their mind to be populated with thoughts that don't belong to these 4 categories. What are they? Number 1, achieving worldly benefits. You might be surprised by that. What do you mean worldly benefits? Yes, because as Allah says in the Quran, وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا, and don't forget your nasib, your portion of this dunya.
وَأَحْسِنْ كَمَا أَحْسَنَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْكَ. That in Islam, it's not about denying the world, it is about تَبْتَغُونَ فَضْلًا مِنَ اللَّهِ, seeking the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this world. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً. And so yes, thoughts about, how to advance your career, thoughts about how to increase your education, how to be in a better position in the world, these are actually positive thoughts, they're productive thoughts. But it can't just be the only thoughts. The second one is repelling worldly harm. So the first one is achieving worldly benefit. The second one is repelling worldly harms. The third one is achieving benefits for the akhirah. And the fourth one is repelling harms of the akhirah. Repelling harms of the akhirah. These are the four fundamental thought domains. Ibn al-Qayyim says, the good soul doesn't let their brain get populated by thoughts that don't revolve around these productive domains. Now, inshallah ta'ala, I think I'll leave this next section, inshallah ta'ala, for next week, because it's a bit of a heavy one and is a very fascinating one as well. Ibn al-Qayyim talks about prioritizing within these four, how to prioritize different thoughts and how do you know which one is more important than the other. Certainly there are some that are very obvious, but there's a very particular one that he actually goes into some detail about. And then we go into a bit of contemplation and positive thinking and positive contemplation, inshallah ta'ala. So we'll end at this madkhal here, which is the madkhal of the khatra, of the thought, of the fleeting thought. And we'll open it up, inshallah ta'ala, for any questions.